Welcome to Season 2, Episode 20 of The Thursday Show. I am your host, Paul Miles. We are doing a series on the book of Genesis. Last week, we discussed a situation that happened with Noah and his sons after the flood in Genesis 9:18 through 29. This week, we will take a look at the Table of Nations in Genesis chapter 10. Thank you so much for joining. Genesis 10:1. Now these are the generations of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and sons were born to them after the flood. Now, if we are following the Toledot structure, we discussed that in Season 2, Episode 1, I believe. Toledot is a word which is often translated. For example, here, when it says, now these are the generations of is Toledot. It seems that Moses, when he wrote the book of Genesis, he could have been taking various documents that existed already and compiling them together under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit to make sure that no errors worked their way into the text. And it could be that this is the beginning of one such Toledot, such that Genesis chapter 10 is its own original source document, which God wanted Moses to put in here. Now, just because it is a new Toledot does not mean that we need to take it out of context. We should remember what we saw last week. In Genesis 9:26 and 27, we see a curse that Noah pronounced and a blessing. 9:26, he also said, blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. Verse 27, may God enlarge Japheth, and may he dwell in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. So, judging from the curse of Noah that we saw last time, curse against Canaan, a blessing, if you will, for Shem and Japheth, we would anticipate that Japheth would have a larger family than Ham. May God enlarge Japheth. We should also anticipate that there would be a more Shemite-centric emphasis, that is, the descendants of Shem. In the Mosaic context, so Moses is writing this down, he is writing to Israel as they come out of Egyptian slavery and as they are preparing to enter Canaan. So we would anticipate that while Japheth is perhaps a bigger family than the other two sons, that the Genesis narrative having a focus on Shem and his descendants as they come out of Egypt, which we will see is a descendant of Ham, there's probably going to be a larger emphasis on Shem and Ham than on Japheth. So we are going to see that Japheth had 7 sons, as compared to Shem, who had 5, and Ham, who had 4. This is not counting daughters after the flood, when it is just these 4 men, Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, who survive, as well as their wives. They're going to have children, both sons and daughters, who are going to have to intermarry. So we're going to have a lot of brothers and sisters and cousins, first cousins, second cousins, in the early state of humanity. So as it was shortly after the fall, whenever Adam and Eve left the garden and had kids. People try to point at this as if it is some kind of a shortcoming in Christianity. I see no reason to think of it that way. On the contrary, if you hold to an evolutionary worldview, then eventually you're probably going to have, let's see, we're going to have a human. The first human would have to come from 2 non-humans. So either his sister is going to come from the same 2 non-humans to produce another human, or he's going to have to go to a non-human, so a human and a non-human mating. That's probably more problematic than brother and sister, going outside of the species rather than the family, right? Or we're going to have 2 sets of non-humans, both having humans. That's very, very unlikely, right? At any rate, The problems that we have from inbreeding today, this isn't just a human thing, it's across the animal kingdom, is that we have intensification of genetic defects. At this point in human history, we probably didn't have as many genetic problems as we do today. But as we have already noticed, the lifespan of humans will drop off at this point whenever we have a bottleneck in the genetic code. So a contributing factor to that would probably be the inbreeding. Okay, we've discussed all of that before. No point in dwelling on that now. So 7 sons of Japheth, 5 of Shem, and 4 of Ham, plus sons and daughters. By the way, these men were old before they got onto the ark. Once they get off the ark, they're going to have kids like within 2 years, right? In total, 70 nations that are being listed. We are not counting Nimrod. We'll get to him later. So 26 nations come from Shem, 30 from Ham, and 14 from Japheth. Generally speaking, the nations of Japheth are northern European, while Shem's are Semitic, Middle Eastern, and while Ham's are more southern, they go south and go into Africa, more or less. As far as the Far East is concerned, some have said that those are the descendants of Japheth or Shem. It's most likely a combination, especially if we think about the very first generation. Did Shem's sons marry their sisters, or did they marry their cousins? It's possible that they married their cousins, which would be very closely related. So generally speaking, though, Japheth goes north and west, Ham goes south and west, and Shem stays in the Middle East, more or less. Okay, moving along in the text. Genesis 10:2, the sons of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. The sons of Gomer were Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. The sons of Javan were Elisha, Tarshish, the Kettites, and the Rodanites. There are some significant names here. Some are seen in the Gog-Magog War, which is not yet come to pass, but it is talked about in Ezekiel. We can read from Ezekiel 38:2, 3, and 6. God said to Ezekiel, "Son of man, set your faith against Gog of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal." There's a couple names that we just saw. "And prophesy against him, and say, Thus says the Lord God, I am against you, O Gog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal." Verse 6, "I will do so to Gomer and all its troops, Beth Togarmah in the north quarters and all its troops, and many peoples with you." So we see there this reference to the north quarters. That's where we sort of derive some biblical proof that they eventually went up north. Ashkenaz was mentioned in Genesis 10:3. This could be a people group that is affiliated with Ararat, so probably Armenia, as following Jeremiah 51:27. Now, the medieval Hebrew name for Germany was Ashkenaz. So Jews today who have their roots in Eastern Central Europe are often called Ashkenazi Jews. So there may have been a drift from Ararat to Germany for the Ashkenaz group. Genesis 10:5. From these, the coastlands of the nations were divided into their lands, everyone according to his tongue, according to their families, by their nations. Now, the word here that is translated coastlands is Iyei, which could be translated as coastlands or islands or inhabitable lands. So we're talking about the time after the flood, going up to the Tower of Babel. Right, it says from these coastlands, the nations were divided. The division happened at the Tower of Babel. Prior to the Tower of Babel, everyone was gathered in one spot. There are some alternative theories, but that's one that I hold to. So we're talking century after the flood. It is likely that we had an ice age that was happening as an after effect of the global flood. So when there's an ice age, that means we have more ice, especially on the polars, right? If you think about what the concern with global warming today is, it's that the ice caps will melt, the sea levels will rise, and that will reduce the land, right? As the sea levels go up, then all the coasts get engulfed in water, which will take out a lot of really big cities. The opposite is also true. If we have a significant cooling so that we have more ice, then more ice means more land as the water gets sucked into the ice caps there. So we're talking about a time then when there could have been land and ice bridges between islands. Could be that the smaller islands that we have today, several of them could be clumped together. So at any rate, the coastlands or the islands, however you translate this particular verse, probably looked a lot different back then than it did today. And the nature of the land bridges and the ice and everything would affect the paths that people took to getting to where they eventually ended up today. Genesis 10:6, the sons of Ham were Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. Cush is probably Nubia and Ethiopia. The name Egypt is Mitzrayim in Hebrew. In a lot of Bible translations, it will not say Egypt, but Mizraim. So MEV, which I'm working with here, happens to translate it Egypt. Put is likely Somalia. It could be identified with Putaya of Old Persian inscriptions. It could be identified with Punt of ancient Egyptian literature. Canaan, the last one there, is the father of the Canaanites. They were genetically Hamitic people, but they adopted Semitic languages and cultures. I am speaking English right now, which is a European language. However, I am not from the English-speaking regions of Europe. I am from East Texas. And a language of antiquity in East Texas, Northeast Texas particularly, would be Caddoan, which is a language that I don't know a single word of. Okay. So whenever we look at languages, these are things that people take around with them. So just because the Canaanites were Hamitic does not mean they did not know Semitic languages. We'll take a look at an interesting exception there in a bit. But first, verse 7. The sons of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, and Septica. And the sons of Rama were Sheba and Dedan. Some of these folks may have gone down into the Persian Gulf. There's some theories about who that is. Going further in verse 8, Cush was the father of Nimrod. He became a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, even like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. Apparently that became an idiom. Interesting. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Uruk, Akkad, and Kelneh in the land of Shinar. From that land, he went into Assyria and built Nineveh, the city Rehoboth, Ir, and Calah. It says from that land, he went to Assyria to build Nineveh. So when would that have been? Anytime we see people moving out in this text, it's after the Tower of Babel. From that land, he went to Assyria, built Nineveh, the city Rehoboth, Ir, and Calah, and Resen between Nineveh and Calah. That is the principal city. Okay, so this is interesting. Nimrod, according to the Bible, was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Today, Nimrod in English is kind of thrown around as an insult to call someone stupid, right? Someone's being an idiot, you say, "Hey, Nimrod." Do you know how that came to be? This is kind of funny, right? So there was a running joke in the old Looney Tune cartoons. We have Elmer Fudd, who is kind of a bumbling, sort of a stupid guy, and he's a hunter. And there's always the gag with him hunting Bugs Bunny. Bugs Bunny, the animal, outsmarts the hunter. It's a funny comical situation. Daffy Duck does likewise. Well, back in the 40s, whenever Bugs Bunny started coming to prominence, I don't know. I guess people were more biblically literate, but it was kind of a running gag that Bugs Bunny or Daffy Duck or whoever it is that Elmer's trying to get would sarcastically call Elmer Fudd Nimrod, right? Because Nimrod's a mighty hunter. Here you are, Elmer Fudd, trying to be a mighty hunter. So, ha, Nimrod.
Precisely what I was wondering, my little Nimrod.
Well, Nimrod started getting thrown around as kind of a name for Elmer Fudd in a sarcastic sense. And I would probably attribute this to biblical illiteracy in America, but I guess people kind of lost track of why that's funny to call a bumbling hunter Nimrod. And so they started thinking, oh, Nimrod means a stupid guy. So they started taking off with this Nimrod thing, meaning a stupid person, when really it means a mighty hunter, which was used ironically. And that is how Moses and Bugs Bunny have teamed up to change the English language. There you have it. All right, moving along. So, the beginning of Nimrod's kingdom was Babel, Uruk, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. Babel is a biblically significant territory. It's where nations began in Genesis 11. We'll get to that next time. And it is going to be restored in the future, in the tribulation period, as a center for rebellion against God. It's also a location for the significant 70-year Babylonian exile. There is a lot of Jewish significance to Babylon beyond what's written in the Bible. The Babylonian Talmud comes from Babylon, for example. Babylon. These are synonymous. Modern day Iraq, which is interesting. There was a very significant Jewish population in Iraq. Goodness, a bit over 100 years ago. But a lot of anti-Semitism has moved in through Islam, and a lot of Iraqi Jews have managed to make Aliyah back to Israel. So, interesting tidbit there. Other locations that are significant for history in their own rights that we just saw would be Assyria, Nineveh, and Akkad, right? That's where we get the Akkadian language from Akkad, language that Nebuchadnezzar would have used. All right, moving along, talking about Mizraim, Egypt. So Genesis 10:13. Egypt was the father of the Ludites, Anamites, Lechabites, Naphtalites, Pathrusites, Kasluhites, from whom came the Philistines, and Caphtorites. Canaan was the father of Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hivites, Arkites, Sinites, Arvadites, Zimrites, and the Hamathites. Now it's interesting that the Philistines came out of Mitzrayim, out of Egypt, out of that family. Pretty neat. Heth, son of Canaan, became the father of the Hittites. I mentioned earlier that there are some exceptions to this thing that Canaanites are Hamitic genealogically, but Semitic in their languages and culture. Well, Heth is the father of the Hittites, whom we see in the ancient Near East throughout biblical literature. Eventually, they go up to Anatolia, to Turkey, and a lot of Bible critics tried to cast doubt on the reality of the existence of the Hittites, trying to make it out as if this was just some kind of imaginary enemy of Jewish literature, until some important discoveries came out in the 19th century, and the Hittites and their language was discovered. Now there are huge fields of study dedicated to Hittitology. You can get a PhD or master's, I think a PhD in Hittitology at an institute in Poland that I was looking at. So that is an Anatolian language. It's Turkish. So not every descendant of Canaan ended up speaking a Semitic language. Anatolian is a Indo-European kind of grouping. So there's that. Amorites were also listed. They are biblically significant. They occur throughout the Bible. But the most famous Amorite is probably Hammurabi, who is not in the Bible. He's famous for Hammurabi's Code, an ancient set of laws, which if you look at and compare it to the Bible, you will see that, oh my goodness, this idea of monotheism, right, is significantly better than the idea of what Hammurabi came up with. The Mosaic Law is a much more fair way of carrying out justice because it views humans as being in God's image. Very interesting, fascinating discussion to be had in comparing the ancient legal codes and religions of the ancient Near East as compared to the one true, authentic word of God, of the one true God. That we should get into another day, Thursday show. So Hammurabi, the name probably comes from Amurapi, should be Akkadian, Amorite for the kinsman is a healer, according to the commentaries anyway. I don't happen to speak Amorite or Akkadian for that matter. Some have proposed that the Sinites went out and became China. That apparently is so Sinology is kind of a term that's thrown around in use with the study of Chinese language and culture. So that could be the case. It's interesting. If you look up the Mandarin character for boat, it actually consists of a couple of characters. One is vessel, one is the number 8, and one is like people. So the word for boat is like 8 people on a vessel, which would be interesting if we realize that the Chinese culture, whichever they are here on the Table of Nations, ultimately have their root in the dispersion from Babel. So they likely carried a national memory of the global flood, which could have influenced their linguistics to this day. Genesis 10:18b. Later, the families of the Canaanites spread abroad. The border of the Canaanites was from Sidon toward Gerar to Gaza, then to Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, as far as Lasha. These are the sons of Ham, according to their families, according to their languages, in their lands and in their nations. Notice Moses gave a bit more of a detailed description of the Canaanites specifically, which makes sense with the initial audience in mind, being as how they're about to go take and possess the land which God has given to them, which is currently being occupied by Canaanites. Genesis 10:21, to Shem, who was the father of all the children of Eber. So Shem is where we get the word Semitic. Semitic languages are that group of languages that ultimately came from Shem. The most widely spoken of Semitic languages today would be Arabic. The language is spoken across many countries, across a couple of continents even. It's related to Hebrew, another Semitic language. Akkadian from Ham is a Semitic language, as is Ugaritic, another Canaanite language from the land of Canaan there. So interesting stuff. The word Eber, the name Eber. Eber is the son of Shem. Eber, or Eber in Hebrew, is where we get the word Hebrew, right? So the word Hebrew is like Eberite, if you will, Ivrit. So, Eber, 21b, whose older brother was Japheth, different from the one that was on the ark there, were sons born also. The sons of Shem were Elam, Ashur, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. The sons of Aram were Uz, Hul, Gether, and Meshech. Arphaxad was the father of Shelah, and Shelah was the father of Eber, another Eber. So we see Aram. Aram, that's where we get the word Aramaic. Laban and his family lived in Padan Aram, and Laban spoke Aramaic. So there's going to be a crossing of the paths with Isaac in a couple chapters. Uz, now that's where Job is from. And it's interesting because he was attacked by the Chaldeans, who are often affiliated with Aramaic. So, interesting tidbit there. Verse 25, to Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided. His brother's name was Joktan. Joktan was the father of Almodad, Stelef, Hazmarmaveth, Zerah, Hadoram, Uzal, Diklah, Obal, Abimael, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. All these were the sons of Joktan. So we have a time marker here for the dispersion at Babel. It was in the days of Peleg. It does not say how old Peleg was whenever it occurred. Biblically speaking, it could have happened when Peleg was in the womb. He's born, and they name him after the event at Babel because it just happened. That's one way. Could be that Peleg was born, lived, and when he was young it happened, so they gave him the nickname then. Could be whenever he was older. Could have been a nickname that he picked up to replace a birth name that he received, or it could be one that coincided with a birth name sometime in the days of Peleg. Now, if we look at Genesis 11, 10 through 16, we can do the math and see that Peleg was born 110 years after the flood. So we're talking a bit over a century of time for humanity to develop, having a lot of children, enough to be dispersed and have all the nations. Enough children to get together and say, hey, let's build a giant building project. That could not have been an easy undertaking. Being as how there is a 110-year difference between the birth of Peleg and the ark, I think we can conclude that everyone who was on the ark, unless they died early, but if we look at the lifespans of Noah and Shem, they were very much alive for all of this, the dispersion and everything, which is interesting. Also means that they could have been having children for 100 years, right? The names that are given here in Genesis 10 are not exhaustive. They cannot be because it does not include females. So it's possible that there were a lot of other males that were born as well, but didn't go on to become great leaders of nations, but likely went on to have children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. So we don't know exactly what the global population was, but it works out that it very well could have been quite a number. So Genesis 10:30, their dwelling place was from Mesha all the way to Sephar, the hill country of the east. That they had a dwelling place indicates that they had been dispersed by this time. Then the chapter concludes with a summary statement about Shem and then Noah in verses 31 and 32. These are the sons of Shem by their families and their language, and their lands and their nations. These are the families of the sons of Noah, according to their generations and their nations. From these were the nations divided in the earth after the flood. All right, so that wraps up Genesis chapter 10. Next time we'll get into chapter 11. This has been the Thursday Show, Season 2, Episode 20. I'm your host, Paul Miles. Thank you so much for joining. I look forward to next time.